Hello, everybody.
Hi.
Good evening for many of you, I think, and good afternoon for the European ones. Thank you for being here with us today. It's great pleasure for ECPM and ADPAN to hold this e-event. And it's very important because we are launching this report, that's Isolation and Desolation, Conditions of Detention of People Sentenced to Death in Malaysia, that was written in a partnership with the Synergies Coopération. It's a very important report because it's the first time that a fact-finding mission was able to be carried out in death row in Malaysia. For a long time, we also thought that it wouldn't be possible, but somehow we managed to gather a good team of investigators composed of 3 lawyers, among them Chow Ying and Ngeow, who was our lead, the coordinator of this team, to meet death row prisoners and also their family members, some psychiatrists and religious leaders who access death row and all the prisoners in death row. So we are going to speak about this fact-finding report right now. We'll have a word from Khoo, who is a lawyer from Malaysia. You all know he's very, very involved in the death row, in the death penalty fight in Malaysia. We also have the honor to have Honorable Cautionary Pato, who will close this event. And then a presentation from Carole Berrih, Chow Ying, our investigators, City, and that I can see, and also from Angelia, who is our family member who will testify about her situation. We'll also have a word from Alain Morvan, the chair of ECPM. So I'll give you a few words about how this is gonna work. Participants will be allowed to give us questions. We will have a time of question and answers. We cannot hear you or we cannot see you. However, should you wish to be seen and speak, you can let us know by raising the little hand that's down on the screen. So we shall give you then the opportunity to speak. If not, then you just write your question in the Q&A that's also at the bottom of your screen. This event is being recorded and also it's going live on Facebook. Should any one of you have a problem with this for personal reasons, please let us know. And I think we can start this event with a few words from Alain Morvan, who will open the floor for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Lina, and just confirm me that everybody can hear me. Do you hear me, Marie-Lina?
Yes, I hear you.
Good.
And I hope the rest can too.
Yeah, of course. So, to all the people gathered here to this afternoon, I just want to say thank you. Thank you again for being involved in the fight. More specifically, I just want to say that Malaysia has been close to abolish death penalty, as you all know, but another kind of fight started a few weeks ago, and we'll need to be stronger to achieve the abolition of death penalty. So I just want to be as quick as possible. Every time all the presidents are making very long and tiring speech, I won't. And just to let you know, I'm very proud this event is been so well prepared by ECPM's team. And I want to thank them in front of all you gathered there, and wish you a very nice afternoon with us. So, and I thank you to everybody. And yeah, I give you the speech, Marie-Lina. Thank you again.
Thank you, Alain, for these few words. It's not just, ECPM, we've been working very hard with ADPAN throughout all these years since 2017. Well, it goes way back, but since 2017, we've been working together, and we've been holding several events that led to this fact-finding mission that is a very important part of ECPM's work, whether in Asia, but also in Africa, for example. So thank you to everyone to be part of this. Andrew, if you wish to add a few words, please.
Sure. Thank you, and good evening, everyone from Kuala Lumpur. My name is Andrew Khoo. I am a lawyer in Malaysia, working, amongst other things, on the issue of abolition of the death penalty here in Malaysia. I think, first of all, I'd like to thank ECPM and ADPAN for asking me to say a few words. I'm looking forward very much to the presentation that we will shortly see. I think I need to say that the situation in Malaysia has become even more challenging. Alain hinted at that earlier. What we've seen, of course, is a new government that's come into office beginning from the 1st of March of this year. It was a backdoor government. It was as a result of the collapse of the governing coalition and the entry of other parties to form government. And it's difficult at the moment to say what the outlook of the new government is, because very soon after they took office and before we have had a chance to engage with them on various issues, of course, we started to face the threat of the COVID-19 virus, and Malaysia went into a lockdown, which we still are in today, and which will last till possibly the middle or maybe to the end of May. So as a result of which, we have not been able to take the measure of the new government and its appetite for this particular area of abolition of the death penalty. But I think it's safe to say, looking at the people who are in the government, that there will not be a very high ambition. And that, I think, is a disappointment, given the circumstances and given the way in which this issue has been approached over the last 2 years after our general election in 2018. The previous government had formed a study group to look at the issue of the abolition of the mandatory death penalty, and I was privileged to be a part of that group. It was formed by the government, and it involved various experts, and we did a lot of interviews of ordinary citizens, of the police, prisons, government, politicians, and also both families of people on death row and families of victims of murder and other offenses which attract the death penalty at the moment. And we had already presented our report and our recommendations to the then minister on the 11th of February. And we're looking forward to it being disclosed and discussed, and our recommendations perhaps taken up and implemented. But sad to say, because of the change in government, all that is now in question. So we have to wait and see once life returns to some semblance of normality as to what the new government, what the new government's approach will be towards this issue. But certainly we are not easily disappointed in Malaysia, so we will continue to fight, and we will continue to struggle to keep this issue at the top of the agenda, and to push as much as possible, as hard as possible, in order to achieve, gradually perhaps, but beginning with a gradual ending of the mandatory death penalty, and then moving on to one day the abolition of the death penalty itself. So with those cautionary but hopeful words, I thank you for joining us this evening. As I said, I look forward to the presentation of the findings and the report, and I look forward to continuing to engage with ECPM, with ADPAN, and with all others who are out there working towards the abolition of the death penalty, both in Malaysia and around the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Sorry. Thank you very much, Andrew, for these words. This fact-finding mission is a real tool for advocacy. So we hope that with the findings that will be described by Chow Ying and Carole, we'll be able to have a very transparent state of affairs when it comes to the death penalty, that we'll be able to have facts that can be shown to the new government and try to be able to speak with them and to start from, well, take over from where we left it and see what can be done. And it's always good to work together with the government and show all what we have found and what can be also their role in their own way. So thank you very much for this. So now let's speak about what this report is all about. I shared with all of you a link to the web version of the report. A paper version will exist in one, will come later, but now with this situation, we couldn't have one. But we hope it can be distributed to a lot of you, whether in Europe or in Malaysia, as soon as possible. So now you can access the report online. I'll give the floor to Carole and Chow Ying, who will describe the work and the methodology, what it involved, and the main findings. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marie-Lina. Well, thank you very much to ECPM and ADPAN for organizing this event. It's not an easy time. And I see that there are quite a lot of people. So thank you for being so numerous today to speak about the condition of Destro inmates in Malaysia. I will start with some information on the methodology and the data regarding the death penalty in Malaysia, and then I will move to the core of the report, which is regarding the condition of detention. And after, I will give the floor to Chow Ying to complete with other information. So regarding the methodology, this report is based on research and on semi-directive interviews that were conducted between July 2019 and February 2020. Most of the interviews were conducted by the ADPAN team. So as Marie-Lina explained earlier, I added some more interview. But as you know, the government still strongly restricts the access to those sentenced to death. So the ADPAN team has been able to visit only 3 people actually on death row, 2 Malaysian men and 1 foreign woman. And even though it's true that these people cannot be considered as fully representative of the whole death row population, there are quite a lot of information derived by them that may be applicable beyond their own situation. And we also triangulated all the interview, cross-checked them with several reports from institutions, especially from Suhakam, information from scholars who wrote a lot about the situation of death row prisoners, interview of other people and institutions, including medical doctors, faith-based organization, human rights NGO, and also relative of death row prisoners, as Marie-Lina explained earlier. Currently, the Malaysian law provides for the death penalty for more than 20 offenses, including capital offenses that do not involve any element of intentional killing, such as drug trafficking or kidnapping. As you may know, the death penalty is still mandatory for several offenses, including murder and offenses related to terrorism. The method of execution is by hanging. It's important to note that the lack of transparency and the secrecy around the execution have prevented for many years human rights organizations from really monitoring closely the imposition of the death penalty. But we know, and that has been public information, that 469 people have been executed since the independence of the country, and that there is a significant increase for the first years, and then an important decrease in the last 10 years. And so in the last 10 years, we had only 20 people who were executed, and especially no execution carried out since 2017, and an official moratorium on execution imposed in 2018. But even though there is this moratorium that is official, the magistrate continue to impose the death penalty on people. So people continue to be sentenced to death. And until recently, Malaysian authorities did not publish detailed data regarding the implementation of the death penalty in the country. There were estimations, nonetheless, from human rights organizations that they collected directly on the field through human rights organizations. And it's only in 2018 that there were really official disaggregated data that were made available by the authorities. And those data showed that the figure that the people had were really lower than the actual figures of people who were sentenced to death in the past years. So in December 2019, the Home Minister reported that there were 1,280 people on death row at the moment, which was a very important increase since 2018, where you had only 700 people on death row. So imagine how important the increase was. So it's a very large a number of people on death row, and it's one of the highest proportion of death row inmates in the world. And I think that's very important to highlight. So the study showed that the vast majority of the people on death row have been convicted for drug trafficking. And according to the data of the government, 70% of the people on death row actually were convicted for drug trafficking, and you had 27% for murder, 1% for firearm offenses, and the remaining 1% for other offenses. But the most important, the crime that is the most represented is really the drug trafficking. The death penalty is highly dependent on the gender of the convicted person. So the women, they represent 11% of the death row population, which is very high if you compare to other countries. For example, in the US or in Indonesia, you only have 2% of the general population on death row who are women. And what is also interesting to note is that 95% of the women, they are actually convicted of drug-related crimes. The death row population is, you have a lot of young people. So 30% of the death row population are young adults between 21 and 30 years old, and 1% above 60. And in terms of nationality, 43% of the people on death row are foreign national from more than 40 countries. And most of them have been also convicted of drug-related crimes. So this is quite important. We will go back to it a little bit later regarding how the nationality affects the condition in which they are treated in prison. And according to Amnesty International, the most represented nationalities are Nigerian, Indonesia, Iran, India, Filipino, and Thailand. So during their time in detention, the death row prisoner may be housed, may be located in the same prison than the other people, but they live in separate blocks in individual cells, contrary to the other prisoners. So because of their sentence, because they are death row prisoners, they are automatically classified as high-risk prisoners. Solely because of the death sentence, even if they have a different personality, behavior, even if they're young or if they're older, if they have a suicide, already tried to attempt the life or not, all of them are considered the same way. And this is something that the NGOs are trying to work against. because you will see that whatever the situation, they are all individual cells and in even very strict confinement. When the people are in the cells, individual cells, they have to be locked at all times, day and night, under constant supervision. So they are only allowed for 1 hour outside their cell every day. So it means that for 23 hours per day, they remain in their cells, where you have a very limited number of activities that are allowed. And you also have a very bad access to ventilation, a very limited access to light, which is of course also damaging for the health of the death row prisoners. So the men and the women who remained in their cells, they have almost nothing to do. All day and every day. They are allowed to read, they're allowed to pray, they're allowed to listen to music, but that's about it. And they do not have the right to work. They do not have the right to undergo any professional training or any kind of education, even though the rehabilitation of all the prisoners is officially at the heart of the mission of the Prison Department of Malaysia. And as I told you before, many of the people, they're young, and so they have just nothing to do and nothing to say, even to release the stress under which they are every day. In addition, the people who are sentenced to death may not be visited by outside visitors, except from their family members, their lawyers, and the religious counselors. But even then, the limitations are very strong, and the visiting conditions are very strictly limited. So there were a lot of religious leaders who were interviewed, and all of them explained that anyway, everything has to be under the sight and hearing of guards. So even the families, they have to discuss with their loved ones, with someone being present. So some explained, for example, that they do not free to talk about a lot of things because they know that everybody can hear what they've been saying. And the duration of the visit, they may not exceed 45 minutes at maximum. And if you write a letter, this replaces the visit. During it's 45 minutes per week. I prefer to be, to explain that too. So an important difficulty is that a lot of people do not live close to the prison. So even for the families to come and meet with their loved ones is very complicated, and it's a lot of work, because a lot of them are in poor economic situation, as you may imagine, and also a lot of them are foreigners. And the situation of foreigners, as I told you before, it's really dramatic. It's particularly worrying. Especially because most of them, they do not speak the language. So they're not allowed, or they're not able to communicate with the guards or even with the medical staff. So when they are sick, they cannot speak directly with the medical staff because they cannot express themselves. Also, they cannot participate in the religious group sessions that take place so that they can discuss and meet with other people. And they cannot even receive books in their own language because all the books, they need to be filtered by the prison staff. And if the prison staff cannot read the book, they cannot understand, they simply will not allow the book to go to the person, even if it's allowed. So they simply dismiss them. The Chinese woman that we spoke about earlier that was interviewed, she explained that her isolation is really extreme. She cannot do anything. And it must be noted that according to international standards, international human rights standards and detention standards, this practice of indefinite confinement for more than 22 hours per day is strictly prohibited. But Suhakam voiced his concern regarding this practice, and the authorities simply responded that there is no use of solitary confinement. This is only for security issues. The discussion with the death row prisoners revealed also that the food that is provided is not good in terms of quality or quantity. The families reported that the prisoners are not allowed to receive food from the outside, which means that they can only rely on the food that is provided in the prison or that is sold in the prison. But as you know, and as I explained, they cannot work, they do not have any money. So for many of them, they simply cannot access extra food. And this goes also for hygienic material like toothbrush, like soap, also bedding materials such as pillows, or even phone cards to call their family. Everything has to be sold, but they do not have money to actually buy anything. And if you look like an example for the women, they have provided with like sanitary pads, but it's only 2 or 3 per month, and it's I mean, it's really insufficient for them, and they do not have any other option than using what is provided to them. Regarding the healthcare, it's important to note that all the prisons they have clinics in the premises, but the prisoners complain that the only medicine that is available is a paracetamol, whatever the disease. So there is a problem in terms of human resources. There is a problem in terms of medicine available. This is also a problem of medical supplies generally, and the women, for example, they do not have access also to a gynecologist, even if they need to have a follow-up according to international standards too. And particularly worrying is the mental health of the people who are sentenced to death and who remain in the prisons. Some people who were interviewed, they explained that there have been a lot of hallucination. The people also interviewed explained that there have been seeing ghosts. Some of them attempted to kill themselves. So one of the person interviewed explained that he attempted to kill himself twice, but was not provided with any kind of psychological or psychiatric care after his suicide attempts. And he explained that there are many other cases where other people actually tried to commit suicide and nothing was done about it. This is also a problem because when you are considered rebellious, for example, when you do not eat, when you refuse to talk to someone else, you are considered, you need to be under disciplinary measures. And those disciplinary measures include stronger confinement with more limited access to food and more limited access to external visitors. So it's very, the situation of those people are particularly worrying, especially because they spend weeks, months, and years in those conditions. And even though there were a lot of discussion about changing the legislation, the regulation to include, to reduce the overcrowding in the prison, there is nothing that is done currently regarding the people who are sentenced to death, and there is absolutely no consideration about their specific situation and about the regulation that is extremely strict for this population. And the authority really focus on overcrowding, but do not work a lot regarding the people who are sentenced to death and who are very numerous today. And as I was explaining, what is particularly worrying is the time they may spend years in this situation. And I will pass the floor to Chow Ying to explain a little bit more the length of detention of these Destro prisoners. Thank you.
Hi, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, all my friends. It's Chow Ying here. I can see from the screen that we have 53 participants, but it's very unfair because I can't see any of you, but you guys can see us. But I'm sure we know each other. We have come across each other in many occasions before. I hope everybody is okay in their confinement. We did not really plan this launching at this time, where we are all locked down in our home. While I would say that while I'm in this little apartment, my parent is staying across the road. I have internet to keep me sane, and coffee and books and friends. Sometimes I do wonder what happens to the people in death row who are locked in their cell 23 hours a day. What do they do actually? I have prepared a PowerPoint slide, which I would like to share. Am I able to share, Marie? Host disable attendees screen sharing.
So,
can I share?
Yeah, try on the screen sharing.
Yeah, just a minute, yeah. No, it says it's disabled.
Let's see if we can.
But it's okay. I can speak from.
Yeah, I hope it's not just on the slides so that you can just also.
That's fine. So, and I hope everybody has a copy of the reports, which was shared by Marie-Lina in our group just now. And inside the reports, there's a quote, there's a passage from a death row prisoners, a woman death row prisoners that I went to see her. And the first thing that I asked her the question is, what do you do the whole day inside your cell? So this is what she said. I usually wake up at about 5 a.m., do some stretching in the cell, brush my teeth, freshen up and go for prayer. Around 7 a.m., the warden will do the counting round, and then I will have breakfast. Breakfast consists of 2 pieces of bread and Milo, sometimes a biscuit. Some Mondays, the Buddhism religious teachers comes to visit us, and we are allowed to sit in the hallway to listen to the teaching. But they do not come every week. They come every 2 weeks. Otherwise, I'm just staying in the cell. Sometimes I write. I cannot go to the library, but there are many books, but there are not many books there anyway. I asked my cousin to bring me an MP3 with music and family photos, but I have not received it yet. I also asked my lawyer to bring me some books and outdated magazines. I have some in my cell, but I read them over and over and over again. There's nothing much to do, really. Most of the time, I'm daydreaming and thinking about my life and my family. During the day, I'm allowed to leave the cell for a period of time, sometimes 45 minutes, sometimes more than that. But we will be staying inside the building, in the main hall. There's nowhere to go. I just walk around. Sometimes I talk to other people. And the warden will come and do a second round in the evening before dinner. While we are complaining about, what to do at home, we are being locked down. These people are being locked in the cell, experiencing profound boredom, sometimes even existential crisis for a long period of time. So how long are we talking about? In the report, we have actually have a chart to capture the number of years from a person's being arrested onwards. So we say that estimations for a pre-trial, when a person is arrested, gone through the remand process, the charge, and numerous counts of mention in court where the chemist's report is not ready, the witnesses are not ready, it took up at approximately 2 to 5 years. So when all these are ready and when it comes to the trial, there are situations where the court are really bogged down and piled up with a lot of cases, and you could have fixed a trial a couple of months down the road, and the trial is not finished. And sometimes the lawyer, the defense counsel, ask for postponement because they are not well, or maybe because their son is getting married. I think the Malaysians will know why I'm talking about. So it will be postponed again, and and when it's postponed, it will be like a couple of months down the road. So the trial typically can take up to maybe 2 years, 3 years. And then it comes to the appeal. So there are 2 levels of appeal in Malaysia, the Court of Appeal and the Federal Court. And appeal process, again, take sometimes 2 to 3 years per appeal, maybe. A lot of the time I have seen that appeal was adjourned because the accused persons, they want to change lawyer. So at the last minute, they want to change lawyers, and the court gave them another chance to change counsel. and the new council came on board and asked for postponement and things like that. So there are many reasons why appeal takes long time. So from trial to appeals, it takes up to 10 years. It could be less, but it can be up to 10 years. So when all the appeal is exhausted, then it comes to the clemency process, which is a pain to the death row prisoners as well as to the family. The reports actually have interviewed some of the family about what do they know about the clemency process. And to our surprise, in fact, a lot of the families doesn't even know that there's such a process exists. And even if they know, they don't even know how to go about doing it. And some of them who have submitted the clemency petitions, they are just there waiting. What is the result? You know, every year they will ask, what happened to my petitions? And they don't know where to go to get an answer. So it is a very painful, long process waiting for an answer of your clemency. And of course, I will not go into detail of the problems and the issues arises from our clemency process, but there is a book by Daniel Prakash. I think he just published the books recently in 2019, which is titled Last Chance for Life Clemency in Southeast Asia Death Penalty Cases. I would recommend that, you know, if you're interested to look at the clemency process, especially in Malaysia in comparison with other Southeast Asia countries, you can look up with the book. So, so Amnesty Report 2019 states the number of years prisoners are in death row. So it says that 453 death row prisoners stay in the prisons for 6 to 10 years. 49, 11 to 15 years. There are 14 of them more than 15 years. And we have 1 death row prisoner in Simbang Renggam, which is on the south of Malaysia, who is inside there for 27 years. And I found out that actually he was convicted of drug trafficking like 27 years ago, and he's still there. So it's really, really a long time. So the report, you know, when we talk about the death penalty, there are so many aspects that we can do research about. Amnesty International released a report last year talking about the unfair trial process and also looking at some of the social economic background of the death row prisoners and the family. So we thought that this report, we want to look at the death row conditions, you know, the prison conditions, as well as explore into the idea of this death row phenomenon that is developing over the world, right? So executions after a prolonged delay under harsh conditions of death row constitute a cruel and inhumane punishment. So we are talking about a prolonged delay and the harsh conditions of where the death row are incarcerated. This concept has been rooted in international law as violations of prisoners' human rights. But I think there are some countries that is resisting this idea. For example, in America, they are saying that the prolonged delay is actually caused by the prisoner themselves, you know, for challenging the process again and again, or even it's the system itself that makes a case that drag on for so long. But the counter argument is simply that, you know, it is in its human instincts that we want to stay alive. You know, so there is nothing wrong for a person, especially a person who has been wrongfully convicted, to exhaust and in fact to explore whatever means that they have, you know, to stay alive. So I think this is an argument that is still developing, but I really hope that, you know, Malaysians can start to look into this death row phenomenon, because as Carole have explained about the situations of the death row, the prison conditions where they are in, it is really a inhumane punishments for them to stay in such a condition for such a long time, and then at the end of it, they still have to face the executions. So there are two elements of delay. There are two elements of death row syndrome, death row phenomenon, which is the element of delay, which I explained just now about the trial, the appeal process, and also the long wait for clemency. But the issue is how long is considered long, the delay. You know, is it 5 years, 10 years? Now, this is really a difficult question to answer. Should we even have a frame to say anyone who is in death row for 5 years is inhumane, or 3 years? So, you know, I do not have an answer for that, but I think this is something that we can all, you know, think about. And the effect of prison conditions, the harsh conditions. Basically, you know, in Malaysia, we call the death row prisoners called bantuan akhir or bilik akhir. Means that they are the last room before the execution. The last, as in like, you know, this bunch of people are really, we have no hope at all. You know, they don't even need to be exist. So you know, the mental distress that they have is beyond words or beyond what we can comprehend. In fact, I went to see these prisoners. Every time when I went to see him, he was caught when he's 19 years old. He was 19 years old, and he's now about 30 years old, right? So every time I met him like 4 or 5 times. Every time I went to see him, he will tell me over and over again the same things, as in like, what has gone wrong in the trial? You know, we should actually, the lawyer, you know, the trial lawyer should actually get the medical report. I mean, anyway, this is a case about, it's a murder case, and he was convicted for common intentions, you know, secondary common intentions. So he was saying that, you know, and every time he's saying the same thing. So you can imagine the only thing that is in his mind, contemplating every time, every minute, is what has gone wrong to my case. Now, what could we have done to not get into that situations? I think he is trying to tell me that, you know, please help him to relook back at the case, you know. So these are the agony that that a death row prisoners face when they are inside there. And we actually interview Dr. Singh. He's here. He is a psychiatrist expert, and he said that prolonged detentions of individuals sentenced to death is inhumane and is detrimental to their mental health. And there are mental health conditions that arose as a result of this prolonged delay in harsh conditions. For example, paranoia, visual hallucinations, suicidal thoughts, depressions, anger, bitterness, boredom, stress, loss of sense of reality, impaired concentrations. So all these are the real situations facing the death row prisoners. I have also read in one report, I think this judge in India, in this case of Rajendra Prasad versus state of Uttar Pradesh, he has a quote. He said that the prisoner must by now be more a vegetable than a person, and hanging a vegetable is not death penalty. What he is trying to say is that executing such a person is inconsistent with the purpose of death penalty, as prescribed punishment was death, not torture followed by death. So you can see that they are actually subject to 2 forms of punishments, you know, a long incarcerations, torturous, inhuman treatment, and then the death. So what does it mean? Does it mean that we carry out the executions? I think the state has 2 choices: carry out the execution properly or don't do it at all. Of course, we advocate that we should not do it at all. So the next slides I have actually is on families. We couldn't really assess a lot of the prisoners because we wasn't granted the permissions. So, but we know a lot of the families. So we went to see the families, thanks to Iza and Amira. You know, they go around the countries and talk to the family. So there are certain, so we got some quote from them, and this is the real people, real families talking about the real situation. Financially, looking at their social economic background, they are coming from, a lot of them are B40. B40 is the below the poverty line in Malaysia. They have to borrow money to pay for legal costs. Sometimes the cost of visitation is quite high because the loved one may be ill or imprisoned in a place where very far from their home. And a lot of them are also sole breadwinners. So when the moment that the husband was sentenced or was in prison, the whole families have to struggle. Emotionally, of course, the separations, the agony, the thought of not knowing when your son is going to be hanged or killed, is something that, again, I would say beyond our normal comprehensions. There's this quote from a mother. This is what she said: "I just wish I could hug my son. It has been so long since I've hugged him." This mother every time she visited the son, it is through a glass door, a glass window. She cannot even touch the son, and son has been inside there for 9 years. I think it's 9 years. And also stigma. This is another quote: "Some people treat us like we are not from a good family. I know that my children are struggling in school after their father has been behind bars." So the stigma to the family, even the impact, the psychological impact to the children, is something that we have to look at as well. Loss of hope. There is no need to fight because it's been a long time and there was nothing we could do. So this is also one of the family that told us, forget about it. It's like they have totally lost hope. But there are families that continue to hope and fight. Over the years, I have been in contact with family members of death row prisoners. Some of them I work with, and I see their strength. Sometimes the strength that I don't even think that I myself have, but they carry the hope, and with that hope, they put up a fight. They put up with all the difficulties, the dilemmas, the agony that they have, but they continue to build up strength and help the loved ones inside the prisons, which really give me, sometimes the motivations to move on. I'm sure, Kasturi, you have been to prisons, outside prisons, together with some family members, holding a candlelight vigils for an execution that is going to happen. A lot of the time, I think a lot of us, in fact, all of us, definitely face these questions that, what happens if the person's murdered is your daughter or your son, right? We, of course, say that they have all the rights to seek justice, but there are many ways of seeking justice. Restorative justice is one of the ways. And I always say that, of course, we feel the pain, but turning around, what if it is your son or your daughter that is inside the prisons waiting to be hanged? I think the pain of a mother losing a daughter to murder is the same as a mother losing a son because of state executions. I don't see which one is more or which one is less, in fact. So these are the, really, we need to look at the family as well. A lot of the time when we want to advocate for the abolition of death penalty, when we want to talk about why rationally, this is the criminal justice process is not perfect, but we are always being bounced back with a very emotional questions like, what if your son or your daughter is the one that's being murdered? So I think this is something that that we have to face, and we have to look at from the bottom of our heart. The reports, I mean, that is the last slide, but I'm not going to read that. But I hope that you guys can actually look at the reports. The reports has the recommendations at the end of it. Of course, a lot of us here, our aim ultimately is a total abolition of the death penalty. It's just how we do it and when we are going to do it. And I hope that along the way, we continue to stay together. We continue to stay strong. Thank you, and we'll take questions later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chow Ying, for this explanation, and Carole too. I think that now it's time for our investigators, Isa and Amira, to share with us their experience. What was the situation whenever they met with the death row prisoners and the families, and whether they have encountered surprises along the way as they were doing this investigation. Thank you.
Hello, hi, thank you everyone. Amira is not here because she's working today. So basically we did the research with the accused, the lawyer, NGO, and also the family. And in general, what I can share is that most of the family members that we encountered comes from a low social economic background, just said by Chow now. And mainly most of them was under B40 groups. And from our experience, this is the thing that led them for not gaining a respectful representation and the judicial standard, because they can't afford it at the very first place. And for those who can afford it, they also have their own struggle until today in terms of the investigation stuff, because there is no transparency, there is no like what is the real method that they have to do, and they don't know to us and also what to do. In a case that we personally met in Johor, there is like even the younger family, the younger generation of the family who wants to fight for his brother case, but he don't have the elders' permission because the elders just lose hope as it already take them years to fight for justice. And personally, what I and Amra encountered personally, I noticed that the family still have the fear when we were asking about, is there any torture, is there any ill treatment happen in the prison, is there any stories that you heard from the prison? So they don't really want to have like a deep conversation, or some of them just totally deny the question lah. And also, last but not least, I would say that during the research, this is the reality and the eye-opener that had not been mentioned in our mainstream media, in the perception of the public about the prison condition, the specific cases, what's going to happen, the mental health of the family members, the inhuman treatment. And interviewing this family make us go home with a deep thinking that if this is happening in our country, it should make us rethink about our humanity and what we believe in. So I think that's the summary of what I want to share with all of you.
Thank you very much. I think Angelia can add some more information on top of that, because you are a brother. You have a brother who is sentenced to death, and maybe you can share what Isa was actually saying about the strength of families.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to say a few words here. My name is Angelia, sister to Panir Selvam, who is on death row in Changi prison. His current case status is on hold due to the pandemic. Talking about his case, the last court case was on 11th and 12th February this year. The High Court has dismissed the application of all 3 grounds, but his battle stays continue. Panir, my brother, he has set to make an appeal, and Panir's lawyer have filed the application. but the date is yet to release. And talking about the challenges that we face is really because it has been more than 6 years. My brother is inside the death row. We have made all the effort to find more details on the drug recruiters that have set this up, and along the way we have visited my brother for past these 6 years without fail, and it's really hard for us because as a middle class family, we spend everything we have during this time. We even sell some of the things to finance the need. It's really hard, and because many of us is working as well, and because it's in Singapore, the exchange rate and the transportation, the traveling time, and everything have cost us so much. But what we really continue to hope is that as a first step, I wish and I hope that as a people-centered community, Malaysia must promote and protect the fulfillment of human rights, including the right of life in prisoners, so that therefore I hope that Malaysia will stop using death penalty for all offences, and through this Malaysia can set a good example for the neighbourhood countries like Singapore. So therefore we can bring this point to save many Malaysians abroad, like my brother. That there's like more people like my brother, more youngsters out there in Hong Kong, in Singapore, in China, everywhere, Malaysians. So I really hope that if Malaysia abolish the death penalty, then we can take this point to bring up in the court. And currently we are struggling to get the government involved in tracking down the activities of drug recruiters, because they are still people, they are still a drug mule is going in, and drug recruiters are still recruiting people to send drugs abroad. So the struggle still continues, and we still continue to fight, like visiting my brother and sending letters, like now the Changi prison have temporarily banned prison visit, all prison visit due to the pandemic. So it has been like more than 1 month now I have visited my brother. So I really hope that we can save my brother. That's all.
Thank you very much, Angelia, for this very, very moving testimony, and we all hope that your brother can be saved, and all the death row prisoners, whatever they are actually. Thank you. This report was written by Carole Berrih and with Chow Ying. We also had the honor to have an afterword written by Professor Roger Hood and Saul Lofren from the Death Penalty Project. He's here with us today, and I would like to hear a few words from Saul. So please, thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Lina. I hope everyone can hear me. Thank you, Angelia. Your testimony was very moving, and I think there are many people who are on the panel who are listening that are really trying their very best to assist with the whole death row situation in Malaysia. And I'd like to hope that this report will go some way. I'd like to congratulate all the authors of the report and all the organisations behind the report for producing such a solid document, such an informative piece of work that really does bring out all the bad things about the death penalty and really should help to convince policymakers that Malaysia needs to move away from capital punishment. I've got I'm really going to speak just for a minute or two. First of all, I'd like to apologise on behalf of Professor Roger Hood. Everybody knows or knows of Roger. He's assisted nearly all of us, and before our time as well, in trying to move countries away from the death penalty around the world. He's written the most seminal book on capital punishment. I think it's in his 5th edition, and Roger would have loved to have participated. I just wanted to mention that back in 2014, Roger was invited by the then Attorney General of Malaysia as a consultant to draft a report to the Attorney General on the status of the death penalty and potential to move away from the death penalty. And this report was completed sometime just before 2016. And one of the concerns that we have is that this report, which was commissioned by the government then, has never been made public. It's never been released for public discourse. And I think that alongside the report that's released today, I think that pressure should be put on the government to make public the findings from this very detailed survey of the death penalty in Malaysia that was done as an independent consultant, which is Roger and other experts in the field. And the relevance of his report will add a lot to the public discourse on the potential to move away from the death penalty in Malaysia. So I think that a concerted effort to encourage greater transparency, and I know that there has been more transparency in terms of the release of data, numbers of prisoners on death row, disaggregated information has been provided now, largely through a great amount of pressure from the Bar Council and their fantastic work now over many years, and also Sue Hakam, that this information would be very helpful and would aid public discourse alongside the report that we're looking at today. A couple of questions really, and maybe Andrew Khoo will be able to respond to these. One concern that we have is that with the change of administration, the change of government recently, we would like to inquire as to the status of the moratorium. Is the moratorium, does it hold firm with the change of administration? Have there been any statements from the present administration on their position on the moratorium? And then the second question concerns the very important recent report of the Special Committee on Alternative Sentences, which I know has been submitted to the government for consideration. And again, in terms of transparency, just like to think that the findings of that report would be made public. And the question is when that would be made public, along with the response from the government to the findings of that particular report. And another few comments, Chow Ying, thank you for your very detailed and as always passionate presentation. You made comments about the death row phenomenon, and the death row phenomenon is it's an unfortunate reality of capital punishment all over the world. Where you have the death penalty, people are suffering. There's always going to be the psychological torture of an anxiety of alternating between hope and despair, sitting on death row, not knowing one's fate. And this argument is used in a number of jurisdictions to challenge the death row phenomenon, the idea that people languish on death row for many years. But I'd say the argument also works to challenge the death penalty per se, because as you said, how do you count the number of years at which point the sentence becomes untenable? And the argument really is that after one day of being under sentence of death, the death row phenomenon kicks in. But in terms of jurisprudence around the world, I think the rough marker is 5 years. I mean, the Privy Council have outlawed the death row phenomenon in their jurisprudence, and they set a marker of 5 years, that the presumptive period after which torture will take place would be 5 years, which is actually less than the European Court of Human Rights when they resolved the Suring case, which was the first big case on the death row phenomenon. So it's something worth looking at, the jurisprudence around this area, which really does buy into the whole horrors of capital punishment altogether, not just delays on death row. And then just something that we picked up in the report that we mentioned in our afterword or conclusion was there was reporting about the fact that after the government made announcements that they'd abolish the death penalty, there were a number of surveys conducted by the media, and they ranged, I think the numbers are between 45 and 82%. Was reported of varying support for capital punishment based on these media surveys. And our word of caution is about the unreliability and a lack of sophistication in this type of assessment of public attitudes to the death penalty. Because what these surveys don't do and fail to do, they don't provide a basis to understand how strongly people feel either about retention of the death penalty or abolition. And these kind of media surveys really don't tell us very much. And there are far more accurate ways to assess public attitudes to the death penalty. And I would encourage people, if they haven't seen it, to look at the public opinion survey conducted by Roger Hood on behalf of our organisation, but also on behalf of Suhakam and the Bar Council. And we would say that those findings, which was the survey was conducted, very large survey, very large sample representative of the society, that those findings are very revealing. And the interest I have in the survey is the lack of general concern, knowledge and information people in Malaysia have about capital punishment. So on the one hand, asking the people through the media what they feel about the death penalty really misses the point, because the same people who may have an opinion on the death penalty, that's given, and people have opinions on lots of things, they don't necessarily have the tools or resources to make an informed decision about something that today in your report, you have produced an informed and detailed report, which really does, everybody should, before they're asked questions about whether they support or reject capital punishment, they really need to have the data in their minds and to be able to consider the nuance of the area which you've now produced. And I think that the dissemination, the wide dissemination of the findings that you have in your report to the public and to parliamentarians, to key stakeholders, hopefully will be crucial in convincing Malaysia that there's nothing to be gained by retaining the death penalty and everything to be gained by abolishing capital punishment in the very near future, in terms of the people of Malaysia and also in terms of the reputation of Malaysia as a democratic nation that respects human rights. So those are my brief comments. Thank you very much for holding the seminar today. I wish everybody well during these very strange times. And it's actually very nice to see so many familiar faces. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Saul, for these very interesting and useful comments and also questions. I think you opened the floor to the now question and answers session. If I remember well, you had two questions for Andrew about the moratorium and also about the task force. So please, Andrew, if you will, you can answer.
Thank you. And somehow I knew Saul was going to ask me those, at least one of those questions. Hi, Saul. So as far as the moratorium is concerned, we have not heard anything that suggests that the moratorium has been lifted. So we are still working on the basis that the moratorium is still in place. And there can be many reasons for that. One being the fact that this government has had other priorities to deal with since it came into office. I mean, for the benefit of some of us who don't know, I mean, the very legitimacy of this government is still an unresolved question, simply because of the way in which it came into power. And then, of course, very soon after that, there was the COVID-19 situation which they've had to deal with. So I don't think the cabinet has addressed or had the opportunity to address any changes in terms of what the current policy of the government of Malaysia is in relation to the death penalty. So that's the first question. In terms of the task force report, as I said in my opening remarks, the report was presented to the government, to the minister in charge of law, and there were plans to have a second presentation to the Prime Minister himself. But before that could happen, the government fell. So the question now is, what, I mean, we will definitely go back to try and fix an appointment with the new minister in charge of law, and I'll say a little bit about him in a short while, with the idea that this is something that the government should still continue to commit to, and also hopefully the long-term, moving forward to a longer-term goal of total abolition of the death penalty, and certainly, we would like to see. I personally would like to see that initial survey report done by Professor Roger Hood to be made public. It's something that we have called for quite some time. We as the Bar Council, but just to give you a sense of flavor. There have been other reports on other issues which has been presented to the government, and the people preparing those reports have also asked for it to be made public on other issues, but the government has chosen not to. So I'm not sure how successful we would be in any advocacy to get that released. The perhaps one silver lining in a general cloudy situation is the fact that the current minister in charge of law has stated that he is personally not in favor of the mandatory death penalty. So at least we think that there would be no rollback on that little bit of ambition that any Malaysian government has hitherto expressed. At least there will be no rollback. He was a practicing lawyer. He did defend mandatory drug offense cases. So he is fully aware of the issues involved in mandatory death sentencing, and he is opposed to it. However, of course, he is there not in his individual capacity. He represents a political party. But that political party too, the Islamic fundamentalist party, is still supportive of the idea of returning discretion when it comes to death penalty cases to the judiciary. So I think at the very least, we might still be able to persuade the new government that they should proceed with the abolition of the mandatory death penalty, and to also hold on to the moratorium. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, for your answer. And it gives hope, yeah, indeed, that the entire work that has been done for a few months now on the mandatory death penalty will not just be forgotten, and hopefully we can still work on that with higher hopes. Thanks. So there is one question here. If any participant would wish to ask a question, as I mentioned in the beginning, you can either type it or raise your hand, which is at the bottom of the screen, and if you want to speak. So we will activate the microphone. So there is one question here from Imogen Rogerson Costello, who's asking about the access to a lawyer for death row prisoners, and if they or their families had any reflections on what would make a good lawyer or problems they faced. Who would like to answer? So it's about accessing legal help.
Drew, can you answer that? Would you like to answer that? On assessing legal aid. Right? Is that the questions?
It's about, wait, let me read it again. I just wondered if you could talk more on access to a lawyer for death row prisoners, and if they or their families had any reflections on what would make a good lawyer on the problems they faced, for the problems they faced. Who would like to answer? Maybe.
I could answer
yeah.
part of that question if nobody else will. And that is the fact that in Malaysia, anyone facing a criminal charge for which the penalty is the death penalty is granted legal representation paid for by the state. So that is a legal right that is granted under a scheme that is run by the court system in Malaysia. But in terms, and the people who are placed on the list of counsel, as it were, that are able to do usually criminal law practitioners of some years standing and some experience, obviously. Because the question is, there are still ones with a lot of experience and ones with some experience. So unfortunately, it's a little bit of the luck of the draw of whoever is, in a sense, next on the list, who is then offered by the systems of people who are charged with a capital offense. I think I could leave that to maybe someone else to answer that question.
Yeah, just a very quick response. Of course, you can, I mean, if the family has the means, they can engage a lawyer, a paid lawyer. But if they do not have the money to engage a lawyer, then as what Andrew said, there will be a assigned lawyer for them. But I think the second questions that you asked about is really when we talk about defense to the capital punishment case, we are talking about effective counsel, effective defense, which means that not only the lawyer, the counsel who should carry a certain experience in handling cases of capital punishment cases, but also in terms of resources to carry out the research, the investigations, and all this to have an effective defense for a death row prisoners.
Okay, I may ask, maybe for Angelia, as you had to face that situation, what was your experience when it comes to having a lawyer or having a legal aid, and what were you expecting from them or your brother?
Okay, at first when we want to took up a lawyer in Singapore, so it was really hard. Somebody have recommended us the lawyer, but again we have to come up with our own money to pay them. And when they look at the issue, they like started to because obviously they will think that drug offenses is the punishment is death penalty. So they have no rights to change it, but they can try taking up the case. And then after the trial, we actually changed a few lawyers, like about 3 to 4 between this 5 years time, because some lawyers they say that they cannot do anything because it was more worse after the sentence had been given. no lawyers are willing to take the case. Even like we go to the extent, we just didn't beg them, like falling down and beg them. Like we asked many of them, so they did not take after the sentence have been imposed. So it's really difficult. It's really difficult for us to find a lawyer when they take up the case also. But they helped us to file the clemency petition, and then to file some affidavits. But they have no 100% hope. Even us, we have no hope that this thing will success. But then when last year my brother got the stay on the execution, then by God's grace we have a volunteer lawyer for his case. So I'm really thankful. But our experience of finding lawyers, it's really tough. It's really tough as a foreigners in people's country. That was like really unexpected, that we didn't expect that we will face this situation. But thank God we managed to overcome. It. But I'm really thankful to all the lawyers, even though they didn't really put their effort. I mean, they really didn't like go into it, but at certain point they did help us to file some of the affidavits and paperwork to the court. So I'm really thankful, and it's a long process, and we have like few lawyers that involved in my brother's case. And finally now the lawyers are volunteering to take his case. So I'm really thankful. So did I answer your question?
Yeah, no, it was good to share your experience, your own experience, because I think it's something to tell about the theory, or like how it's supposed to be or how it is, and then what you actually lived as someone directly touched by that. So thank you very much. There is another question for Andrew. I don't know. I see that the camera is off. I hope he can hear us. So the question is from Ahmed Kahoud. He's asking, Andrew, in your research, if there is any argument from the governmental institutions related to Islamic Sharia, and how you could deal with this issue.
Well, yeah. Thank you for that, and thank you, Ahmed, for your question. At the moment, the issue of the death penalty is only relevant to the secular courts, because they have the sole jurisdiction for offences that carry the death penalty. We have Sharia courts in Malaysia, but theirs is a much more limited jurisdiction. So when it comes to most of the criminal offences, and certainly criminal offences covered by the penal code, it's a secular court. Having said that, in terms of talking about the reform of the death penalty, one of the issues that has been raised by Islamic scholars is the possibility of implementing a system of diyat, or what can be referred to as blood money or compensation payment, whereby instead of imposing the death penalty, the family of the victim accepts certain monetary compensation in lieu of the death penalty. There are, of course, certain fundamental issues with that, both from a human rights perspective as well as from a practical perspective. And we can, I can answer this at length, but given that time is brief, I'll just mention some of the key issues. In terms of human rights, it's the fact that the decision whether or not to execute or to hand down a death penalty is then taken away from the courts and given basically to individuals, in this case, the family of the victim. And I think people who are looking at the administration of justice and a rule of law system will have a great deal of difficulty with handing those kinds of decisions to people who are outside the legal system itself. So I think that's one of the issues. The practical issue, of course, is what is the amount of payment? If, for example, the perpetrator or the accused person comes from a very rich family, they may be able to make a huge payment and satisfy the requirements of the victim or family of the victim. But what if in cases where the alleged offender is poor? And then what about cases where there is no direct victim? Like, for example, in Malaysia, we have mandatory death sentence for drug trafficking. I mean, you can't point to a single victim or to the family of a single victim who would be in a position to make that request or demand. So there are both legal, conceptual, and practical difficulties about an issue like diat or compensation or blood money. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any more questions? I haven't received more questions. I don't know if they are on their way. But maybe you can add some more content on foreign nationals who are sentenced to death in Malaysia, and how it works maybe with the consular rights, and maybe give us some more information. Maybe Sol can do that.
Well, one of the findings in your report is that a very large number of prisoners on death row, in particular for drug trafficking offences, are foreign nationals. And internationally, this is governed by the Vienna Convention on Consular Relations. But interestingly, Malaysia has gone one step further. They've domesticated that international treaty, and there is domestic legislation replicating the Vienna Convention. So according to domestic law, foreign nationals should receive superior protection in relation to their particular status. But what we know around the world is that foreign nationals are disproportionately represented on death rows around the world. And there are major concerns about whether or not they receive the same level of protection as other members of society. And I think there are concerns, obvious concerns about language, being arrested in an unfamiliar system, not having support networks to assist them, not being able to necessarily instruct a lawyer. There are a number of associated problems. And we know through our work of assisting foreign nationals in Malaysia that it is not in every case that the Malaysian authorities immediately and without delay notify the foreign embassy or consulate that a foreign national has been arrested and detained. And this is a requirement under the Vienna Convention, and it's a requirement under Malaysia's domestic law, that the minute immediately on arrest or detention, the Malaysian authorities are required by law to notify the embassy of that situation, that a national from X country has been detained. And that would enable the government of the detainee to put in place arrangements for interpreters, for lawyers at the point of arrest. And this doesn't happen in every case, and we know that. And this is a major concern that impacts on the fairness of the trial ultimately in relation to foreign nationals in Malaysia. So the answer to the question is sometimes embassies are notified without delay, but that is certainly not in every single case. There are certain countries that don't have consular representation in Malaysia as well. So it is a checkered picture. when it comes to foreign nationals and the protection of their specific rights and their specific needs. And with such a large proportion of the death row population coming from outside of Malaysia, this is of great concern from a human rights perspective.
Thank you very much for adding this point. Are there any more questions from participants? And if not, I don't see any more questions. Would you like any of you want to add anything before I give the floor to Kasturi Pato for a closing word? No? Okay, so please, Kasturi. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie-Lina, and to all my friends and colleagues who have been here from 8:30. Good evening. To Ellen Movan, Angelia, Professor Saul, Andrew, Chow Ying, Siti Nuriza, Nicholas, Adele, Carole. I hope you all are well and keeping up with good spirits, and despite this very challenging and, that's what Professor Saul said, strange times. It's quite hard if you're the last speaker, or rather the last person to wrap up, when you have so many esteemed speakers who have shared their experiences, their knowledge, and their information on what is happening. But as an MP right now, I think what I can say is that, like what Andrew pointed out, the status of the moratorium on executions is currently in a limbo. I think we don't know exactly if the government has any plans to reintroduce it, or if they're going to keep to what Pakatan Harapan introduced. After all, the moratorium was just created at the stroke of a pen by the former law minister, which was something we all feared at one time. If there was a regime change, what would happen to the status of this moratorium? But having said that, we also have not convened Parliament, which was supposed to have sat on the 9th of March, right up to the 16th of April. Currently, the 18th of May has been locked as the date for the opening of the first Parliament sitting. This is only in compliance with the fact that Parliament must convene within 6 months of the last Parliament sitting. Even so, there have been a lot of calls that Parliament should sit for more than a day. Currently, the government has decided for Parliament to convene only for 1 day. It will be officiated by the King. The government would probably table maybe very basic government business of the day, which would be to speak on the budget, to speak on other bills that may be coming up to be debated in the July sitting. However, we are pushing for either a virtual sitting, which could be longer, or to actually convene a longer sitting this time. If that happens, then rest assured there will be more MPs who will be speaking about on the status of the death penalty, or rather the abolition of the mandatory death penalty. So as we know, currently in Malaysia, there are 33 offences that warrant the death penalty, 11 for the mandatory death penalty, of which 9 are from the Penal Code and 2 from the Firearms Act. And this was actually supposed to have been tabled and debated in the previous sitting. There were other issues that came about. We were concerned about strategies. We were concerned about numbers in Parliament. So it was postponed to supposedly this year's first sitting. But with COVID plaguing the entire world, whether it's going to be in the July sitting, whether it will be in the May sitting, if at all the government decides to have a longer sitting other than the 1 day which has been scheduled, we don't know. We don't know the status of the parliamentary special select committees on human rights or on gender and other related parliamentary select committees that can work together, like for the Home Ministry with the issue of the death penalty. We don't know the status of all these select committees, if they would be if their titles would be changed, their descriptions would be changed, the chairpersons of these committees would be changed. Would there be additional select committees? Would there be additional all party parliamentary groups? We don't know much about what is happening within the walls of Parliament, but we hope that within the days to come, we'll be able to address some of these questions. There have been some meetings with the Speaker by MPs from the opposition. Whether or not the Speaker would still remain is another thing. Now, why I'm sharing all this with you is that we have the significant success, or rather the small victories that we had seen. The dialogue about the death penalty, even the dialogue about the abolition of the death penalty, which then went into the abolition of the mandatory death penalty, only started after 2018, after the change of the regime. And it's important also to mention the role of the Parliament, because the Speaker was someone who attended our roundtable events. He gave the opening remarks on events co-organized by ECPM and the PGA on the abolition of the death penalty in October. And even this time around, last year in November, it was 2018 October, and last year in November, when ECPM and PGA came to Parliament to attend a discussion in the Parliament, particularly consisting of the special committee that was supposed to study and come up with alternatives to the death penalty. The Speaker was very happy to allow the Parliament to play host to such things. Now, we hope this trend and pattern continues. But I must point out also that the current Law Minister, Taqiyuddin, who comes from the very fundamental Islamic party, also asked a question in Parliament last year about the death penalty. He was, I would say, not on the same page with all of us when we spoke about abolishing the mandatory death penalty. He asked a question if Malaysia would consider public executions like in Iran. I'm quite concerned a question like this had come out from the mouth of a lawmaker, let alone someone now who is the current law minister. I hope that I will be wronged in the current parliament sitting, the coming parliament sitting, or a statement from his office or himself on his stand on these reforms. But speaking about the death penalty alone is not enough. We are also looking at the IPCMC, which is a bill to strengthen police integrity, police accountability, to report police misconduct, etc. So the abolition of the mandatory death penalty also goes hand in hand with how cases are investigated, how reports are prepared. As we had seen 2 years back, a South Korean boy was wrongfully charged with drug trafficking in Seremban. I think, Andrew, you must know about this case, right? And the raiding officer who went into his apartment and conducted the raid, who led the raid into his apartment, knew about drugs that were planted in the boys, in the South Korean student's kitchen. So you have, in this case, and I then say that it's an isolated case, where there's a lack of transparency, integrity, and accountability on the part of and the enforcement officers. So I think all these issues about strengthening democracy, strengthening human rights in the country must come with this sort of legislative amendments as well. Not just the death penalty, it's not a standalone subject. I think it's very important that we speak about all of it together to get more people on board. But then again, there is also, over the past few months or a year and a half, we have seen also an increase in number of lawyers who are coming forward, standing together with victims of murders, brutal murders, etc., who are advocating for the government to retain even the mandatory death penalty. And these are very emotional arguments, and because these are also very clickbait sort of news, many media pick it up, and it's main news on this media, even on social media as well, online media as well, which is very difficult, because every time you think that you're one step closer to speaking about abolishing the mandatory death penalty in a positive light, these are the lawyers who come forward and say, oh, then what about these families? And, crying, mothers and heartbroken fathers, you know, these sort of very emotional arguments then take precedent on how people view the death penalty. I mean, I've listened to Chow Ying time and time again speak about the families of men and women on death row, but I always put myself in the shoes of the skeptic, of the larger group of Malaysians who say, so what about the families of those who have been murdered or those who have been killed as well, and especially brutally killed, and what about them? So it's also something perhaps to think about, to see how we can also speak about those families and forgiveness. I'm sorry that Susanna is not here today. Susanna's brother, for those who don't know, is undergoing, he's also a death penalty inmate, and he's been in for 18 years. And lately, Susanna had shared with us and also on social media that her brother is suffering from medical conditions, cancer in particular. So, and all this has a lot to do with the stress that they go through in prison as well, which is a big contributing factor to this sort of chronic illnesses that you get, that you won't normally get unless you are under this sort of duress. But having said that, I hope that the conversation on the death penalty will be reintroduced again into the sphere of when you speak about human rights. But it's quite delicate at the moment. I think you've also seen over the past 4 or 5 days, there has been an outrageous spike of hate speech on which is against the Rohingya refugees in Malaysia, very xenophobic, very racist, and full of hate against them. And you cannot, it's a herd mentality, and it's believing fake news, and it's believing news that has been fabricated just to paint Rohingya refugees in a bad light. Now, we're talking about the Rohingya refugees and what they have gone through for the past 4 or 5 days, the harassment, the kind of verbal abuse. And I can't imagine if you speak about the death penalty now at this moment in Malaysia, what sort of picture would be painted against people who want to speak about the abolition of the mandatory death penalty in particular. So I think it's important that timing is also right, and how we frame the narrative to speak about abolishing the death penalty in Malaysia, so that it becomes something tangible even for fence sitters to relate to, or for them to say, you know, okay, you know, I'll hear you out, I'll listen, and you know, I'll make my opinion about it. And Professor Sal, you mentioned about media that had asked, conducted online polls, and this is something we have raised many times, time and time again, to our friends who are reporter friends, journalists in Malaysia, that you can't have a one-size-fits-all sort of Q&A when you want to speak about the death penalty. And this was rightfully pointed out by a professor from Japan at the Oslo 5th Congress on the abolition of the death penalty. She said it's not like asking you whether you like chocolate or you like strawberry ice cream. It's not clear-cut like that. You have to give scenarios, you have to give situation, and you must give choices. And at the end of the day, I trust no single person on earth will have that much vengeance in their heart to wish another person dead. I mean, you know, very simply, you know, talking about it, no one is born with a bad bone in your body that wishes ill and death upon someone. And, you know, so it just baffles me that it's always the easy way out to ask, do you support the death penalty, yes or no? Should the government remove the death penalty, yes or no? And these are questions that you are asking a very vastly misinformed public about the death penalty. And then again, the conversation, because it is not a bread and butter issue, as what I've always been saying, it doesn't affect every Malaysian, every lay person who will say, you know, I want a safe country for my family. I want to be able to live safely in my country. If you've committed a crime, you have to pay the price for it. We agree. You have to pay a price. If you've committed a crime, you must pay a price for it. You must be punished for it. But just that your punishment is not death. And that's just something that just cannot grasp, you know, they don't see it is an eye for an eye argument. So yeah, I hope that when Parliament convenes, or rather the partial lockdown is slowly lifted, the MCO is slowly lifted, that there would probably be more engagement with civil society and the government. I think the current government, I probably would like to please civil society more than they would like to please us, the opposition MPs. I think there's room for dialogue and there's room for discussion, particularly by even Islamic civil societies like ABIM. They've actually been sort of one foot with us and the other very cautiously with the current government now when you speak about the death penalty. But also because it's Ramadan, I think we can also start to speak about issues on mercy. I have some friends who have been trying to talk to me to say, how can we talk about the death penalty now during Ramadan when we want to speak about mercy and forgiveness and compassion, you know, things like that, values like that, soft values that we. So, you know, if we could put our brains together and discuss and come up with something. But then again, at this volatile time, anything and everything can be so easily swayed in a wrong direction, and then it gains so much of negative publicity than the positive publicity that it deserves. But rest assured, MPs are, you know, the usual suspects: Ram Karpal, Maria Chin, Wong Chen, myself, Kula, Thomas Su, many other MPs who are now in the opposition are, you know, firm believers on the right to life, which is enshrined in the Federal Constitution, and working together to abolish the mandatory death penalty. I think it's going to be step by step again. From we're going to probably start from scratch a little bit, but I think it's important now also for pressure from, well, soft pressures from international communities, reminding the government to do the right thing, reminding the government to follow through with what Pakatan Harapan had left, what was in the manifesto, which is to abolish the mandatory death penalty. You know, just nudge them slowly in the right direction. But I'm always a little bit concerned when you speak about abolishing the mandatory death penalty and giving discretion to judges. It's a bit of a slippery slope. In the event all the judges decide, oh, you know, since we are allowed to use now our discretion, and through our learned knowledge and experience, we think this man should be hanged, this woman should be hanged. How are we going to, how do we you know, face a situation like that? Yeah, so I keep wondering, it's very scary. But then, you know, seeing everyone here, you know, gives a lot of hope for us, Malaysia, and also to Angelia. You know, seeing you here, you know, hearing your story and your testimony and your sharing inspires us to work harder to ensure that not just Malaysia abolishes the death penalty, that you know, stories like your brother will not repeat again, whether it is on our own soil or elsewhere. Thank you, and we stand in solidarity with you and your family. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Kasturi, for this very inspiring speech. And I think that we could all agree that we could speak about death penalty and abolition and how bad it is in 4 hours. Unfortunately, we don't have time. All I can add before we close this session is that death penalty in Malaysia has been a roller coaster since 2018. Before that, it was quite, we knew what was happening, not much. We were not very much able to talk about it. But then we had the surprise in 2018, and then just up and downs up to now. The good thing is that it put together a lot of actors, stakeholders, and people have started working very firmly on the topic. And then many reports have been done, and they are not overlapping. They are all completing one another. So I think that those are tools that we are all creating and that we are trying to put forward to support all the Malaysian stakeholders, and whether MPs or the civil society, Suhakam, and step by step we shall go towards abolition. In 2017, when we started with ADPAN, we didn't believe we could make this report that now is here. And we knew that we need to take a lot of precautions to work with you, members of parliament, and the civil society for us to organize events. And then all of a sudden things started becoming a bit easier because of political will. So now let's work all together, and let's keep the dialogue and the topic out there. So even with a new government, it will not be forgotten. People will speak about that, and at one point it will happen. So many thanks to everyone. I hope you'll enjoy the report, and hopefully see you soon in person when this crazy time will hopefully go. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.